So let's start at the beginning.
Oh my God.
You may very well have started dance before Legat, did you?
Yes, I did. I lived in Tunbridge Wells, and I had two teachers in Tunbridge Wells before I went up to London. My father died when I was 14, and we moved up to London, and I was going to Princess Seraphim Astafieva, if you've heard of her. She had a studio in the King's Road, Chelsea, and I used to go to acting classes at Italia Contes in the morning and Astafieva at lunchtime. And then Astafieva died some 2 years later and said I should go to, before she died, she said I ought to go to Legat. So I went to Legat. And there were no boys then, you know, there were no boys studying ballet. But Anton Dolin had learned with Astafieva, so she was well known for that, from that point of view. So I was 14 when I went to Legat.
And what was the studio like? If you went in the door,
studio.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It was enormous, the biggest studio I think I've ever seen. And it was very nice, and it had a nice floor, a rough wood floor with a bit of a spring in it. And I got used to that and liked it very much. However, it was bitterly cold in the winter. Couldn't warm this thing, you know. One little anthracite stove. Legat, you know, he always played the piano for the classes. He never got up.
Mm-hmm.
Only once in a blue moon he would get up and demonstrate something. But he sat at the piano and played marvellous music that sort of helped you to dance the steps, you know, and the rhythm which gave you the right impulse.
What was his personality like?
Well, he was very funny, he was very humorous, and he used to explain the steps, the enchaînement that he wanted on the top of this grand piano. And he had beautiful hands, and he used to do the steps on the top there. Most of the British dancers couldn't understand it because he could speak 3 words of English, sort of strong back, like a sausage, that kind of thing was his only English. So he would explain with his hands, and he could be quite sort of a little bit vulgar sometimes. He used to also play the balalaika. They had an orchestra which used to congregate in this big studio.
I understand the North Russian Association owned the building, did they?
It could be. I don't know. Yes.
Okay. Because I found in the registry either they were paying him or he was paying them, so one way or the other.
He had a secretary who was also Russian, and called Captain Chaplin.
Oh.
Have you heard of him?
No.
He used to sit at the top of the stairs and take the money if he was lucky. And he'd been a guards officer in Leningrad. But it wasn't Leningrad then, of course. It was
St. Petersburg.
Mm-hmm. And no, he had a scar down his face from dueling.
Oh, you're talking about this?
Chaplin, yes.
Yes, yeah, right. And what generally was his Legat's personality? Did he seem more happy than sad, or did he have his moods?
He was very, very jolly. The only time that he got mad was when various dancers would come very often to class and not pay their bills. Then he got a bit sour, but otherwise he was one man, quite a well-known dancer teacher. He didn't pay for years on end.
Oh, really?
And Legat chanted at the back of the class after we'd finished. The dancers used to stay on and practice a little bit in the studio. He was that chap over there. He hasn't paid his bill, but otherwise he was very, very funny, very funny, very amusing, and very, very jolly.
When you started there, what stage were you in your?
Well, I had studied in Tunbridge Wells with a teacher who had got me through the Royal Academy of Dance children's examinations, and that was about it. So I knew my bar work quite well. I was not good at that, but my aunt got an introduction personally to Legat through a rich client of hers who took me to Legat's studio and introduced me to the old boy. It was Leonid Massin.
Oh, yes, of course.
And he danced with me in a private lesson. And he stood with me at the bar, and Massin's bar was not very good at all. And I was very pleased with myself. I was chuffed because my bar work was rather good. However, when we got in the middle, Massin twinkled away, marvellous dancer. And I hadn't a clue what was going on. So it took a long time. It took me sort of a year before I understood what he was saying and what he wanted me to do. I had private lessons once a week and the class of perfection every day at 11:30.
What would that involve, the class of perfection?
Well, all the visiting artists, dancers used to come to that class. He had some regular pupils, but we had a lot of Andrei Glevsky and those sort of people would come, and Tumanova and Baronova and various people like that would come to the class of perfection. He also gave a children's class at 5:00, which was also very complicated until you got the hang of it. You had to study with him sometime before you understood him.
But what would you actually do in the class of perfection? In fact, if you can.
If I could. Well, they were very complicated classes. He did wonderful enchaînements, which if you knew how to do them, they followed beautifully. But if you didn't know the steps, and most of the English dancers hadn't a clue about that, they were totally baffled.
Is the class of perfection a general class that is given by other teachers, or is that his?
No, it's the only one I know of, but they probably are others.
Or maybe with different names.
That's right, yes.
Yes.
It was the highest professional class, shall we say.
And you said you stayed there until you were 16, so that would be about 36, would it be?
That's right. And that's when I joined the Sadler's Wells.
Now, I understand that he had rather negative feelings about Sadler's Wells.
Well, they had negative feelings about him, I think.
Well, I think they all had negative feelings about him.
It was partly due, I think, it's my opinion, that Nicolai upset the apple cart.
Oh, really?
She was very insulting to most people. I'll give you an example of that. I later went to Wuppertal as ballet director and engaged one of her students as a student in my company. And Nicolai said to the girl, "Don't take any notice of what he says. He doesn't know any more than you do." And I was very upset because on the Legat advertisement in the Dancing Times and elsewhere, it said great dancers that Legat had produced, Margot Fonteyn, Alan Carter. And so I thought, this woman is being very foolish to insult me and have her on her poster.
Yes. Was her English better than his at that
yes,
stage?
Fractionally, yes. She was very clever. She set up a school in Kent, or Sussex.
Well, that would be the Tunbridge Wells.
Tunbridge Wells
Yes.
School. It wasn't in Tunbridge Wells, it was out. But I have two friends who took it over when she finished.
Well, what did you think of Sadler's Wells while we're on that subject?
Well, I rather poo-pooed it, I have to say, before I joined.
Yes.
And then,
were you there when Anna Roya was around?
Oh, yes. Yes,
Because she was
there all
around
the time.
most of the time.
Well, she was. I don't. I have to be careful how I say this. Anna Roya lived in Collett Gardens
Yes.
with Legat.
I knew that she had something like a closet almost. It was. Yes.
And there was another Yugoslavian called Oskar Harmoš.
Oh yes.
A very, very tall chap who used to partner Anna. And Anna absolutely adored Legat and looked after him, really, until Nicolai arrived, and then she upset the apple cart, rather. And she'd been touring in Europe and doing a sort of an act with two men being thrown up and caught by these two men.
It wouldn't be Sir Paul Dukes, would it?
Well, he wasn't a dancer, no.
Oh, he was a dancer.
Was he dancing?
Yes, he was.
Oh, I didn't know that. But he was
there are pictures
not of my generation.
There are pictures of him throwing her up in the air.
Paul Dukes throwing
Yes.
Nicolai, really? Well, anyway, Legat didn't really get on with his wife at all. I suppose they did at the beginning of their relationship, but by the time I knew him, he used to say, "She no understand, my wife, she no understand."
Oh.
That was the technical thing. He used to, well, I'll explain that. He used to give very subtle directions. For instance, if you did a pirouette, a very, very slight lean towards the way you were going to turn with the pirouette en dedans, for example. And Nicolai used to teach the same thing, but instead of a little tiny lean, she used to lean right over.
Oh, yes.
And so he didn't like that at all. We didn't either. Neither did Joy. But that's how it was.
I guess you would have been around when Joy was there as well. I'm talking about Nikolaeva.
Oh, yes, Joy was. I think I was already there when she came in.
Yes.
Yes. Because she was younger than me.
I wanted to go back again about 46 Collett Gardens. If you would take me from the door when you enter, how you would get up to the studio.
It was a big double door.
Double door.
Yes. We opened one side, for us to go into. And the male dressing room was downstairs.
Oh, that's interesting, because Joy couldn't remember if there was a dressing room for the boys. She said,
"Well, I should have Joy, I hope not." No, it was a room which looked out on to Barons Court railway station. And it had bars down and a sort of, it had a grill. And it had two rooms. One was the loo and one was the changing room. And all the time I was there, Legat's jockstrap was hanging up and his old tights and a pair of shoes. And they must have gone back to the Leningrad days to St. Petersburg. And one day, quite a few boys used to attend. I suppose there were about 6 or 7 of us there. And I was the youngest. I was always the youngest in those days. And we came down after class sweating and took our clothes off and so on. And then Legat came in very quietly. And he didn't say anything, but he went into the loo. Then after a while, the system made a loud noise. And then Legat came back into the room, and all the boys looked at him. And he said, "Much better you go before class." Which was typical of his sort of wit. I have told that story many times. It's well sweet. It's illustrative, I think, of the old boy.